வணக்கம். பண்பாட்டு பயண புத்தக குழுமத்தின் இன்றைய நிகழ்வுக்கு உங்களை வரவேற்பதில் பெருமகிழ்ச்சி அடைகிறேன். இந்த புத்தக குழுமத்தில் முதலில் படிக்கப்பட்ட புத்தகம் திரு ஆர் பாலகிருஷ்ணன் அவர்களின் பெருமுயற்சியில் உருவான ஜேர்னி ஆஃப் அ சிவிலைசேஷன் இண்டஸ் டு வைகை புத்தகம். ஆங்கிலம் தமிழ் இரு மொழிகளிலும் வெளிவந்த அந்த புத்தகத்தின் பெயராலேயே இந்த குழுமத்திற்கும் பெயரிட்டிருக்கிறோம். மானுட இந்த புத்தக குழுமத்தில் மானுட இடப்பெயர்வுகள், மொழியியல், பண்பாடு, வரலாறு, அகழ்வாய்வு, மரபணு ஆய்வு தொடர்பான புத்தகங்களை, ஆய்வு கட்டுரைகளை படிப்பது என முடிவெடுக்கப்பட்டது. அதன்படி டோனி ஜோசப் எழுதி வெளிவந்த ஏர்லி இந்தியன்ஸ் புத்தகத்தை பல வாரங்கள் படித்தோம். இறுதி வாரத்தில் புத்தகத்தின் ஆசிரியர் டோனி ஜோசப் பங்கேற்று கேள்வி பதில் நிகழ்ச்சியை வெகு சிறப்பாக நடத்தி கொடுத்தார். இன்று துவங்கி மொழியியல் வல்லுநரான பெக்கி மோகன் அவர்களின் ஃபாதர்ஸ் டங், மதர்லேண்ட், த பர்த் ஆஃப் லாங்குவேஜ் இன் சவுத் ஏசியா என்ற புத்தகத்தை படிக்க இருக்கிறோம். 8 அத்தியாயங்கள் அடங்கிய இந்த புத்தகத்தின் முதல் அத்தியாயம் த ரோடு வித்தின். அதை பற்றி திரு சுவாமிகந்தன் உரையாற்ற இருக்கிறார். 8வது அத்தியாயத்தை படிக்கும் பொழுது புத்தக ஆசிரியை திருமதி பெகி மோகனை அழைக்க இருக்கிறோம். இந்த புத்தகம் பற்றி சுமந்தா பானர்ஜி என்ற பத்திரிகையாளர், எழுத்தாளர், as expected, this book is both serious and entertaining, appealing to academics as well as layman readers என்று சொல்லுகிறார். இந்த புத்தகத்தை குழுமத்தில் திரு பேராசிரியர் ராஜ் முத்தரசன் அவர்கள் சொல்லும் பொழுது இந்த 8 அத்தியாயங்களும் 8 பேச்சாளர்களை கொண்டு இந்த சிறப்பு மிக்க புத்தகத்தை படிப்பது, நாம் கேட்பது இல் பி அ ட்ரீட் என்று சொல்லுகிறார். நிச்சயமாக இந்த புத்தகம், இந்த நிகழ்வு ஒரு பெரிய ட்ரீட், விருந்தாக அமைய போகிறது. இந்த படிப்பு குழுமத்தில் உங்கள் அனைவரையும் வரவேற்பதில் மீண்டும் பெருமகிழ்ச்சி அடைகிறேன். உங்கள் நண்பர்களுக்கும் இதை தெரிவிங்கள். மகிழ்ச்சி. வணக்கம்.
நன்றி ஐயா. இன்றைய திறனாய்வாளர் திரு சுவாமிநாதன் கண்ணன் அவர்களை முறையாக அறிமுகம் செய்ய திரு மணிவண்ணன் ஐயாவை அழைக்கிறேன். அன்மியூட் பண்ணிக்கோங்க ஐயா. மணி ஐயா.
நன்றி. இந்த தொடரின் முதல் பேச்சாளர் திரு சுவாமிநாதன் கண்ணன் ஒரு பல்துறை அறிஞர், செய்யறிவு ஆர்டிபிஷியல் இன்டெலிஜென்ஸ் தத்துவ ஆய்வாளர், ஆனால் முழு நேர தொழில்நுட்ப பணியாளர். தொழில்நுட்பமும் மனிதவியல்களும் கூடுவதை பற்றிய அறிவை, த நாலேஜ் இன் த இன்டர்செக்ஷன் ஆஃப் டெக்னாலஜி அண்ட் ஹியூமனிட்டிஸ், மேம்படுத்துவதே அவரது தொலைநோக்கு பார்வை. வரலாற்றில் ஆழ்ந்த ஆர்வம் கொண்ட இவர் தற்போது வரலாற்றை பற்றிய முறைசார் கல்வியை தொடர்கிறார். மனித நாகரிக வளர்ச்சியில் மிகப்பெரிய முன்னேற்றங்கள் ஏற்படும் போது அடிப்படை கொள்கைகளுக்கு மீள்வது வாழ்க்கையின் குறிக்கோள்களை பற்றிய மேம்பட்ட தெளிவையும் மகிழ்ச்சியையும் பெற ஒரு நல்ல வழியாகும் என்பது அவரது நம்பிக்கை. ஒன்றிய முடியரசின் தலைநகராம் லண்டனில் வாழும் இவர் தற்போது செய்யறிவு தத்துவத்தில் முனைவர் பட்ட ஆய்வை தொடர்கிறார். is pursuing a PhD in the philosophy of artificial intelligence. இந்த தொடரின் முதல் பேச்சை வழங்க திரு சுவாமிநாதன் கண்ணன் அவர்களை அழைக்கிறேன்.
வணக்கம். அனைவருக்கும் வணக்கம். என் முன்னே பேசிய அரசு செல்லையா மணிவண்ணன் இருவருக்கும் மிக்க நன்றி. என்னை அறிமுகம் செய்வதற்கும் மிக்க நன்றி. என்னுடைய உரையை தொடங்குகிறேன். Predominantly, I will conduct this discourse in English for obvious reasons, so that it can actually reach many.
We have participants, non-Tamil speaking participants as well. So let's have it in English.
Absolutely. So that being the reason, I plan to conduct this discourse predominantly in English. Where possible, I might try and get some Tamil equivalents, but the key message is to make this as broad as possible. So bear with me as I do that. I will share my presentation and we will go from there. Hope you can see my screen with the presentation on, everyone. Fantastic. Obviously, I won't belabor the point. The book is Father Tongue, Motherland, written by Peggy Mohan, a renowned writer in linguistics. The first chapter is Road Within. First of all, sorry? Geeta needs to go on mute. Whoever is not speaking, kindly if you can go on mute, please double check if you're on mute. What I will be covering in this discourse is the first chapter. Just keep in mind this is the first chapter. We will look at what who Peggy Mohan is. Obviously, I won't belabor the point because that's been covered earlier. Then the significance of the title of the book, which is Fatherland, Mother Tongue. It's a very it's an excellent title that signifies more fundamental things as we would see in the discourse. And this being the introductory chapter, obviously that's not going to have any conclusions or pithy deliberations, but I must say that for an introductory chapter, she has got some very, very fundamental things to start with. So we look at that. We will predominantly look at key concepts like Creole and Pidgins, which are forms of languages, because they form the fundamental argument for her to start this book with, and we will see what they are. People might have heard those things, but we will see what they are, and then ensure that they all play their roles in her discourse as we go through the chapters later on. Then we will also touch upon what she signposts from this chapter as a continuity to the other chapters. So that's what I plan to cover. And a couple of disclaimers, shall I put it that way? You might see a lot of slides, but they are very, very short in terms of content in every slide. I do not plan to stay longer on any particular slide, especially there are some slides that have longer content, but I don't plan to stay on those slides for too long, but they are just there just to quote Peggy directly so you know what she's saying verbatim. That said, let's go to the next one. The fundamental aspect she starts with is that she's actually entering the scene, listening to music, and she comes up with this analogy. She is comparing music to language to explain the key point where everything, any entity, any endeavor has two things. One is the surface structure, and there is a deeper structure within. In music, you would have noticed, or you would agree, that melody is the surface, but the chords, bass, the raga in Carnatic music form the deep structure. One cannot exist without the other. One is grounded on the other. Now that's the case with music. So she actually looks like she's a very avid music fan. So she's enjoying music, and she actually draws this analogy and homes into this point, which is the surface and the structure of anything. And when it comes to languages, we have a similar makeup, don't we? The first one is the surface, which is actually the layer formed by the words we speak, the words we write, but that's just the surface. The words obviously are grounded on structural patterns, deep structures, and things that we normally call as grammar in a language, in a linguistic setup. Well, we now go into the content of the book. She starts with the analysis of the origin of Creole languages, and most often we would have heard of the term Creole, and especially as languages in the Caribbean context. I just wanted to one more time refresh our memories as to what we mean by Caribbean. The Caribbean region is a region below Florida and adjunct to the Latin American region and just on top of the South American continent. So we've got a number of islands there that we would call as Caribbean. So the scene is set to start with the Caribbean region. I think Peggy herself speaks Trinidadian Creole, which is actually a form of language that originates from English with a local flavor, which we will see how they are formed. But what are they? The Creoles and the Pidgins in the Caribbean. I need to introduce here, or Peggy introduces two key concepts here: the Pidgin language and the Creole language. Both are languages or language forms. One is a very, very simplified contact language that has got no big structure in it. It is very transactional. It's just a very purpose focused. But the Creole is a much more evolved natural language that has structure and grammar to it. And you can see that the evolution, or at least the theory of Creoles, says that. So the Pidgin arrives first and Creoles. But how? Let's see that in context. Imagine that this is Caribbean. This could be true anywhere else because we have Creole languages in many settings, not just Caribbean. The theory goes that the European settlers, you need to go back in history in terms of the slave trade and the plantation and all that. The European settlers came to the Caribbean region, and there were local people living there as well. So what they did is they brought Western African immigrant labor to the Caribbean region. So it was actually a hodgepodge of many cultures: the English or the European settlers, West African labor, migrants or slaves, and the local people if they were there already. What happens, as you can see, according to the theory, is the emergence of a pidgin language. And again, I'm insisting that this is a theory, the classic theory of Creole language. And there's a reason why I call that out, as this is the classic language of the formation of Creole languages. So just follow that line. The pidgin language, which Kalavai Mori எனக்கூடிய அந்த ஒரு surface level ஒரு ஆழ்ந்த கட்டமைப்பு இல்லாத ஒரு pidgin language, which is purely transactional, is a contact language, emerges. Why? Because there's a need to go on about the transactions. It's just a number of words strung together for transactional purposes. So the theory says that there is a pidgin language that emerges, which then emerges to evolve, or evolves to becoming a Creole language. You have many Creoles, as I said. So Peggy speaks Trinidadian Creole, there's Jamaican Creole, and all sorts of Creole languages. So the pidgins will then evolve into a more structured Creole language with fundamental grammar and the systems that any language needs to have. This is the standard Creole theory that we have seen so far. But the definitions are always good, but it's definitely a bit more intuitive to look at some of the examples. So I've just got some examples as to what we mean by pidgins and Creoles. Let's say English. So the situation is there's English settlers coming into Caribbean, and how a Creole would sound, or what is a Creole equivalent of the English statement, "That's my book." So that's the English statement. The Trinidadian Creole says that, "Dies me book." And then the Jamaican Creole says, "Afi me book dat." You can see that the fundamental English statement is very clear, and the Trinidadian Creole is closer to English. It says, "Dice me book." It's almost like a very fashionable language that the Gen Z would probably be happy to have. But the Jamaican Creole is a little bit far away from that. It is a bit more far removed from standard English. But they wouldn't have emerged as Creole straight away, so they probably would have taken the pidgin route. But I've just got other pidgin examples. So pidgin is intermediate. There's the West African general pidgin that it says that, "Now my book dat." So this is what I said. So this is just a few words strung together. It does not have a structural beauty to it, but it does the job. It says that, "Na my book dat." So you got all the words just jumbled up as though it's a word salad. And that's a pidgin. In a nutshell, pidgin, keywords strung together, Creole, more structure with grammar. So that's what we see as Creole and pidgin. So I hope that introduces you to pidgin and Creole, because she goes on about analyzing them in very, very deep, in a very deep manner, and I suppose in the further chapters as well. So having said that, she ponders and she introduces the challenge early in this chapter. And you can see that this will set the scene for the theme that's going to come later as well. That the question is, can the Creole model be extricated from the Caribbean setting to probably the South Asian setting, which is the Indian subcontinent and elsewhere even? Why is that a curious question? Given that Indo-Aryan languages, and again, when we say Indo-Aryan languages, there's many types of Indo-Aryan languages. The old ones, the medieval ones, and the more modern ones. We are referring to Indo-Aryan languages, to the more modern ones like Hindi, Urdu, Bhojpuri, Awadhi, and so on and so forth. It looks like they have a surface of Sanskrit by way of words, if you remember that definition, but then they may have a grammar that's slightly different, or actually fundamentally or significantly different from what we have in Sanskrit. So surface, one language; a structure, different language. It has a very similar setting of a Creole where the words were borrowed from English and the fundamental systems were actually retained from the West African languages, because remember that these were the West African immigrants, slaves that actually came to the Caribbean. So surface from one, structure from another. Hindi might have that. We will see some examples as we go through this presentation, but that is the reason for which the reason based on which you can be curious that can these be Creoles too. She specifically goes on to say that you can do that by inspecting the morphology of the languages. அந்த சொற்களின் அமைப்புகள் especially towards the end, எப்படி அந்த சொற்கள் முடிகின்றன என்பதை வைத்து அந்த morphology, அந்த கட்டமைப்பு, சொற்களின் கட்டமைப்பை வைத்து she actually makes that case. But then case endings, what are case endings? So she talks about case endings of a word. A case ending is just nothing but if you have a noun or an adjective, and every noun noun being a word plays a role in a structure and in a statement, making sense or giving meaning to the statement. So they can be subject, object, possession. So Swami can be a subject or an object, or it could be also expressed in a possessive sense. So this is really the cases, the various cases, and the endings as to when those words, the subjects or objects of the words, when they play a particular role, how do they end? Therefore, endings. We're going to inspect those case endings to actually see if we can make a theory that could these Indo-Aryan languages, or do they have some similarity to Creoles as well? Can they be Creoles as well? So that's actually what she is discussing in chapter 1. And some examples as to the case systems. Obviously, this is a very pithy slide with lots of content. I wouldn't go too deeper into the slides, but let's look at two cases. The nominative case, where there's a subject and there's the other part of the sentence. The subject is Rama, right? And we are using Sanskrit. Sanskrit has many cases. So in Sanskrit, the nominative case is quite simply Rama falls. Rama virgindrar. In that formation, in the nominative case, Rama is just Rama. Let's look at the genitive possession case. This is a sentence where it actually conveys a meaning of possession, that the subject possesses something. Quite specifically here, Rama's book. So Rama the subject, and Rama possesses a book. You can see how the case ending of Rama is changed to Ramasya pustakam. Rama patati, Rama falls. Ramasya pustakam. So this is the case ending. So how do the case endings change in Sanskrit is brought out by these examples that I could find from elsewhere, but she talks about case endings and a closer watch on how these case endings tell a different story. I'm also watching the clock here, so apologize if I rush a little bit. We have plenty of time left, no worries. The same with Tamil. We are familiar with many of the listeners today are probably Tamil speakers, so you're very familiar. One form, the nominative case is maram as a verb. And then when it is actually in the accusative case, so we looked at the nominative case, the genitive case. Now the accusative is you point out to the object. So sutti kattum பொழுது மரத்தை, and the thai is a இணைக்கப்பட்ட ஒரு suffix மரத்தை அப்படின்னு we have the case ending manifesting in that manner in this case. So these are examples as to what case endings are in different languages, and this is the basis on which we would make a case as to how the Indo-Aryan languages, the modern Indo-Aryan languages, mainly Hindi and such, have these case endings exhibiting different characteristics similar to Creole in the Caribbean. And further elaboration is how we can look at. So in Sanskrit, in the house means graha. And I'm not a native Sanskrit practitioner. I do not know the perfect pronunciation of Sanskrit, but graha is the meaning that it means all in the house. It does not mean house. It means in the house, right? But it doesn't have to be the same way when we have other languages. Specifically Hindi does not have graha. It has gar me. You see how, even though Hindi has flavors or content borrowed or originating from Sanskrit, You can see how the grammar is starting to diverge a little bit. It has an exclusive postfix or suffix may to mean gar may, in the house, rather than graha. So that's where we're starting to notice that pattern changes in grammar. Now we need to introduce another concept called the Prakrit. Prakrit, we've heard of Prakrit. It can be referred to in two different contexts. Prakrit as a general term to mean any language that was simplified from a previously sophisticated, that can be a simplified form of a sophisticated language, very specifically Sanskrit, right? So Sanskrit is very complex, it is highfalutin in some cases. So Prakrit could be a language that originated from Sanskrit, but it is it's simplified for transactional use and more popular use, right? But Prakrit could also mean specific languages, and there are a few examples of Prakrit, Pali, Magadhi Prakrit, and so on and so forth. These are Prakrit languages, Pragridam, that originate from Sanskrit. But what you need to also look at is how these languages, or the speakers of these languages, had a certain reputation of being elite or commoners and so on, which we can see in the slide. The process of Prakrit, or creation of Prakrit, Sanskrit speakers, the original language, the complex language, the progenitor is Sanskrit, and then a Prakrit formation from it. So you can see that I've got the eliteness scale as well at the bottom, which shows that Sanskrit was supposed to be super elite, as the history goes. Prakrit is still elite, but it is different from a commoners languages, and this is the commoners languages that we will focus in the future slides to mean the Indo-Aryan languages that came after, or as a process beyond or after these two things. So that's what is a Prakrit is. It is still very close to Sanskrit or a previous progenitor language, but it is a bit more simplified than the early one. But you should notice that it still is elite language. Not everybody speaks Prakrit, even in the local population. So that's what I wanted to bring out: super elite, and the commonest languages. That's what we mean by Prakrit. So just to in a nutshell, we talked about Pidgins and Creoles. We also talked about Prakrits as a concept. So Peggy, I'm just introducing these terms because these are the terms that Peggy uses to discuss concepts in this book. What is Prakrit as an example? So there's a usage. So Indian English, she makes the case that Indian English is a Prakrit. It is emerging from English. It does not deviate too much from the grammar. It also borrows words from English, but you can clearly say that Indian English is quite distinct. So words like "you must be knowing my father," which in original English could be "you know my father," or "are you having a pencil?" And I used to say this as well when I was in Trichy, where I did my schooling. I would be very happily asking someone, "Are you having a pencil?" But nowadays, when I live in London, my English is true to what English is in a classical sense. Do you have a pencil? Rather than "Are you having a pencil?" I'll go to this last example, my own Vande Bharat example. I actually traveled in Vande Bharat recently. The announcement says, "Doors are opening and closing only at the station." So that I thought was Indian English and a Prakrit. So quite simply, in a train in England or even in the United States, will quite simply be doors close and open, or doors open and close at the stations. They won't say doors are opening and closing. It is nothing wrong, grammatically perfect. It conveys a sense, and it's Indian English. Nobody can judge whether it's good English or not. It is Indian English, rightly so. But only thing is, it's a Prakrit form from English, and Peggy makes this, so I thought I'll throw in my Vande Bharat example as well. So the question comes back again: are modern Indian Aryan languages Creole? Before we make a conclusion about this, there are some sticking points. We couldn't just immediately, just based on the structural similarities between Creole languages and the modern Indo-Aryan languages, Hindi, we couldn't just say that as an easy statement, because there's other tensions, right? There was not a social chaos associated with the importing of the migrant slave labor to the Caribbean lands, and then there was not this emergence of pigeons and so on. So there's no social chaos, and there's no like for like circumstances that could allow one to just say that crudely that they're one and the same. But however, I have a feeling that Peggy actually is trying to do the same thing, but in a different way, right? So this is verbatim from page 17. She aims to turn the whole model of language change on its head and arrive at another theory that makes more intuitive sense, one that better explains. Meaning, it's not as simple as the settlers came in, they brought some migrant labor, slave labor, and then the pidgin languages emerged and they evolved to Creole. It's not as simple as that. So she's starting to challenge the classical notion of that. But the question that I have in my mind probably will emerge in the future context is that, is she just trying to do that in the Caribbean context, or is she going to also include the same argument of the development of that new theory in the other contexts, including the subcontinent, is to be seen later on. I think we saw this earlier, the Graha example, the Garme example. To add, in Tamil and Malayalam is a very similar situation. Like Garme, we will say, we have ill, we till, like Garme, we till. So ill is again a postfix, suffix, rather than Graha, which is a locative form in Sanskrit. So you could make the argument here that Hindi is closer to Tamil and Malayalam than Sanskrit as far as the structure and grammar is concerned. Therefore, the question again emerges. So, was there a similar force such as Creolization? By Creolization, what we mean is the whole migrant labor situation in Caribbean. So, could there be, or was there similar forces in play that led to the creation of these Indo-Aryan languages in a similar sense? Yet to be seen in the future chapters, but that's the question that we encounter in the first chapters as we read her book. I mean, specifically the first chapter of the book. Well, there are challenges, as I said. One we talked about social chaos. There's no social chaos, very similar to what we have in the Caribbean. It's completely different, a much more peaceful, elongated, long-term migration towards the Indian subcontinent. So that you wouldn't have that as the same reason. And then sameness of Creole, regardless of whether they emerge in plantations, they may have variations, but there's a sameness in all Caribbean Creoles. So it's hard to explain as to how that would be the case, because if everything was containerized and confined, then how would you have a certain sameness at a higher level in this case? So questions like that arise in the situation. The key point she makes is that if you go back to the visualization here, the settlers, the local people, the Pidgin language, Kalawai Mori, Melotamana Kalawai Mori, surface language emerges transactional. And then the first generation children of that Pidgin speakers create the Creole language, which much more grammar and so on. How can that be really possible? Because when the Pidgin emerges, we already know that the Pidgin is structureless. It's just a very topical surface level languages, devoid of any structure. But how would they actually bestow the structure very similar to their ancestral languages, perhaps from Western Africa in that setting? How does it emerge back in again? You can't say that, because these children are first generation. They probably just know Pidgin. They probably do not know the original Western African languages from the slaves that came in. So how can you make that argument? So the point she makes is the Creole should actually be from a tabula rasa, meaning a white tabula rasa, simply a white paper, meaning writing afresh. You start afresh from the scratch. So everything needs to be from the scratch, which means if Creole emerged from the scratch, could it be possible that it is completely different than having any structural similarities to the old languages, the West African languages, the generations emerged from? So it is not a self-contained cohesive theory, according to Peggy, the classic Creole theory, and she feels that there is inherent tensions in that theory. However, she admits that Pidgins exist though, meaning there's always this transactional environments. You need to have transactions going on. So you will always have this very, very local, ephemeral, short-lived or surface manifesting Pidgins, but they do not create Creoles. They just live like that. They are very different from Creole. They have a different life cycle from Creole. For example, she says that Pidgins are sterile in the sense that they do not create generation that have a mother tongue originating from pigeons. So it's really not very consistent and inherent, this whole theory. Whereas Creoles, when they emerge, like Trinidadian Creole, for instance, it appears that they wipe out the older languages, the progenitors, the language in the past, and they become the dominant language. Pigeons don't do that. They just stay along these Creole languages with the purpose and life cycle of their own. And a bit of a context for the Indo-Aryan Creole question. She focuses the timelines in the 10th and 12th centuries, the Indo-Aryan, the mixture languages, the Creole-like languages emerging, replacing the older languages that would have stayed there before the arrival of Sanskrit and so on, were replaced. The Indo-Aryan mixtures became permanent, and they became the permanent language of the generations, and also mother tongue of the generation, right? That's what the difference between Creole and Pidgin is, and she places that in a chronological time frame in the 10th and 12th centuries. Yeah, I mean, the same question remains, can the Indo-Aryan languages really be Creole? So she is actually reminding us of the question through the chapter, and then she feels that she needs to create a new theory, or it's not that she feels that she needs to, she thinks that it is quite natural that we should look for another theory that has a better explanation, rather than the anecdotal tale of settlement colonies. It's very easy, that settlement theory. Migrant laborers came over, settlers came over, Pidgin came, and they become Creole. Very simple, but I think she thinks that that's too simple to be substantial and worthwhile. Again, a bit of context for the Indian subcontinent. Going all the way back, this is the ancient times, not ancient times, probably 65,000 years ago, when the migration happens. We know that there's probably 3 dominant migration, two being more important. The first wave of settlers, and these are wanderers, they came as families. They didn't have purposes. They were wanderers rather. They came as families. But then the point she makes then, subsequently, mostly subsequent migrations were male dominated. I mean, you can look at that in many classic examples. It's really you might have women as well here and there, but predominantly male that's actually migrating either for work or for other purposes of exploration. It's like male dominated. So that's what happens in the subsequent migration. So she makes a case that in subsequent migration towards India is predominantly male dominated, and there was a time where the importance were shifting from the educated Brahmins to kings and tradesmen and craftsmen. So this is where the society is forming with all the divisions of labor and the societal considerations and classifications with labor and culture. I mean, everything is the same culture, but you still have subcultures within culture organized along those lines. So this is the context in which he is considering the possibility of Indo-Aryan languages being compared to Creole. The one other point that I wanted to bring out from this chapter is the focus on women. And as we know, and as we saw in the earlier slides, women are not natural migrants. And there's a reason why male are the predominant migrants. And I know I copied the whole paragraphs just to quote verbatim. I won't go through them all. She points out a Trinidadian question, that in the Trinidadian setup, only when women were also brought in, and the women were brought in as migrant laborers, Bhojpuri was starting to take root in that region. Until then, it was not quite sure, because only when you have women coming in, you have children being born, and both the father and mother passing on both their tongues, wherever the father comes from and wherever the mother comes from. They actually pass them on to more substantial language formations, in this case being Creole. And she finishes with a nice little quip here, or a funny note here, saying that and the Indo-Aryan languages are Creoles too, because they're also, as the witches in Shakespeare's Macbeth might have said, of woman born. So she's putting the focus on women as a key reason. So the previous explanations, the Pidgins and Creoles, does not focus on women predominantly. It's not even talking about women, but she says that you need to bring the women into the equation, because they are fundamental for the continuity of the culture and therefore the new language formations. Therefore, we are coming to the end of the slides, and therefore my discourse about the first chapter, what she thinks the process could have been is, rather than a pigeon route, the process could have been that there were male settlers coming in, and you can see there's a bigger local population. The local population would have been speaking the old languages. This is prior to Hindi or Bhojpuri and so on. But there was always a local people that were somewhat elitist, that actually mingled with the male settlers and created Prakrit, or they became Prakrit speakers. And then it's not a dramatic situation that the Creoles emerge, as in the case of Pidgin Creole, which just happens in one generation. The argument she makes is that the languages coexist. So you can see that in this scenario, the old languages exist, the Prakrit emerges and they exist, and they both exist, leading to mixed languages. Here is where the Prakrit speakers and the local people that are not elite, the commoners, the old language speakers, also mix with Prakrit speakers, and then the new languages are born. And these are the more modern Indo-Aryan languages. So you can see how these things can also coexist, which also means that the period that the time period we are talking about in terms of creating Creoles or these more modern mixed languages is elongated. It's across generations. It's not just in one generation or two generations, as the previous Creole theory suggests, with the pidgin being the intermediate conduit between the two languages. Now, putting that a bit more into the Indian context, I think I said this in the earlier slides. The Sanskrit, Prakrit, and any one of those Prakrits, and more Indo-Aryan being Hindi, Bhojpuri, Audi, and all that emerging, and so on and so forth. So that's what she says. So we're coming to the end of the slide. I'm looking at the time. I think it's probably going to be okay, because 9:40 is the time given to me. To put this in context, she's written a book earlier, The Wanderers, Kings, and Merchants, a linguistic journey of India or something like that, where she discussed the male-driven migration, etc. And she makes the case that Sanskrit is the father tongue, who had children with the local men, with the generation that created the Prakrit, but there were others who were out of the loop still, with languages that live alongside Prakrit, according to the visual I showed there. So that's the crux of this first chapter. So just to summarize, this is the thing that I said I'll discuss, and I started the discourse. We talked about the keywords. What are pigeons, Creoles, pigeons, Kalawai Mori, surface level, male Ottomana Kalawai Mori, Creole, much more stronger, structural language with grammar included. We also looked at what is the pidgin-based Creole theory, the simplistic theory of Creoles in the Caribbean setting. And we also discussed how we challenge that theory, the Creole theory, and how there are new ways to think about Creoles, the elongated emergence of Creoles rather than a simplistic, drastic emergence, and then reimagining the Creoles, or likening the Creoles, or comparing the Creoles to the modern Indo-Aryan languages / Creoles, ? I don't know how she handles that in the future chapters in the Indian context. We also talked about the role of women in the Creolification, or the Creole creation. And quite honestly, that is what I had for you all today in terms of the first chapter. So I wish you all good luck, and I hope you get the continuity from here to the subsequent chapters. Thank you, and over to you guys for discussions or questions or whatever it might be the case.
Thank you very much, Swami. It was indeed a great session. Over to Professor Rajmutharasan for the Q&A session.
Thank you for a very nice overview. That was excellent. First, let's answer questions that you guys may have for the speaker. If you could put up your hands. Yeah, the first one is Parimal Pesinga. Could you unmute yourself and then ask your question?
That's why I put the hand.
பேசுறப்பா.
இல்ல, அவர் he shared a clapping smiling.
Oh, I see. Any other questions? So Swami did such a clear presentation that no questions?
Never the case. they probably can't get started with the questions because they may have too many.
I have lots of comments, but no questions.
Okay, then if there are no questions, we can.
I have a question.
Yeah, okay, good.
Okay. It's a great presentation, Swami. It's excellent. And that motivates us to, all of us, to complete the book and be ready for subsequent talks. I think you talked about the pidgin. I think it's comparable that some of the native population feel that the incoming language is a elite language. For example, UK also, German was the language of the rulers or elite families. And even in United States, earlier, German was considered to be made as a mother tongue. I heard that closely it was voted out in the very early stage. Can you comment on that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, one that is very passionate to me. Obviously, there might be other experts that have a view on this. Rather than elites, I would say in the UK setting, obviously the current interpretation of those things are, the rulers are elites, but that may not immediately mean that German is an elite language. But it was definitely seen as the other language. And this is not true with the German situation. It's true of the languages of the Vikings and the Danish, the English is, the word is from the Ingles. There's many other waves of languages that came in. The realization that these are external languages from the incoming people or the foreign people, there was the realization and the coming together of the English themselves. That's how the English language originated. Was there a notion of superiority or eliteness? Yes, not specifically just for German. It was always the case for Latin and those classical languages, which still is actually considered elite, but it's more, in that setting, it's more outsiders versus insiders and nativity versus invaders, because the Vikings and the Danish people, the Danish tribes really invaded the region that is Great Britain. So that feeling was there in my view.
Also, one more point that maybe subsequent chapters will deal with this, the Sanskrit coming in. And the local sets of minority were embrace the language. Maybe because of men brought in the language, women had the native language. So, as you said, Sanskrit, Prakrit, and then common language. The common language had some basic grammar, local grammar. You said Hindi may have some elements more common to Tamil and Malayalam. So, is it because of a general phenomenon, incoming language, and locally they think that elite? Maybe Sanskrit is associated with religion and rituals. Maybe because of that. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree with that. And I half know and mostly guess, as I'm not a linguistic, but it makes sense to think that Sanskrit being the language of the elite, which really means that, or any language of the elite, means that it is very complex in structure. It's not teachable, learnable. It's not more broadly taught, learned. And also the nature or the intention of the people is to preserve that exclusivity. You preserve exclusivity.
Also, the purity, preserve the purity.
Right. By preserving the purity and exclusivity, you actually retain, if there is any status association with such languages, which is the case with Sanskrit, I suppose. And therefore, the locals are alienated from that process. And you can see that the Prakrit speakers were able to do that somehow, maybe for reasons of trade or commercial reasons and interactions. The successful people that were able to do that led to the creation of Prakrit, which is still elite, right? Although not as elite as Sanskrit, it is still elite. So it's actually a downward gradation of eliteness as these things pass through.
Thank you. Thank you.
Vahis, you have comments to make? Go ahead.
Sridevi has a question.
Yes, Sridevi, I think you have questions. Please go ahead with the
yes.
questions, and then I will go
Okay,
with my
sounds good.
comments.
Unmute.
Unmute, Paninga. Unmute.
Yeah, sure. Good evening. No, I just had a bit of question as well as a discussion. You can take it. The thing is, the first one is, why do you think like the Jamaican Creole is very different from the Trinidad Creole? Is there any what is a why was there a difference? A Creole is a common process, right? A Creolization is a common process, but why was there a difference between a Trinidad Creole and the Jamaican Creole? So
Sure,
what
sure.
made that difference? The first one. The second
Yeah.
one is, as far as I understood, the languages when they come in, I think she's separating it into three structures. The first is a local native language, which the people speak there. And the second is one, the foreigners come for trade. The first reason why people come in is for the trade. So when they come in for the trade, the language they use, the what they speak, it is only for the trade, and that is what is she's calling it as pigeons or whatever. I'm not able to pronounce it properly. It's called pigeons. I thought it's pidgins. Okay, it's pigeons. And once these are the temporary languages actually, so that is what I got it. So this doesn't get into the structure, it doesn't get deep into the people's language. So
That's
next comes your creolization. The creolization is something where the natives, the it is like a permanent settlement where the persons come in. It's not for the trade. They permanently settle in, and when they permanently settle in, the people mix. Their languages are observed by the local people, where the surface forms your creolization. This is what I got it from what you said. I just want you to clarify, is this what it
yeah.
meant?
Absolutely. So I think you've got two things. The first one is why is Jamaican Creole different from Trinidadian Creole? I think the answer to that is quite simply there's no one West African language in play because these migrant people are from various different countries, right? So you need to consider that factor. So you'll have settlers in one area who is predominantly from a particular region, a country, nation state, etc., etc. So that could have been and because that provides the key ingredient for one of the two things that we talked about, the structure and the fundamental basis and so on. The surface is just the same. Let's say if it's predominantly an English colony, then the surface language is just English, but the second level, the structural level is being differentiated depending on where the migrant labor or the slaves came from. So that's actually probably one of the key reasons for the emergence of different varieties of Creole. The next thing that you said is that's correct. Pigeons are just very, very superficial, ephemeral, short-living, sterile languages that end with transactions, just stringing together of words. I think that's why I think there's more credibility in what Peggy says in the formation of Creole, not through pigeons, but actually through the Prakrit route. And that's actually what you were saying, more fundamental. I mean, in both cases, it might be the situation they came in for trade, but regardless of why they came in, the emergence of Prakrit, another substantial language, very close to Sanskrit, but again a bit more practically usable, transactional, and they live together. I mean, Prakrit and other old languages, they live together, as you rightly said, over generations. There's mingling and mixing of these two speakers, leading to much more substantive, ground-up formation of languages that became this Indo-Aryan or Creole languages. So that she thinks is a more plausible reimagination of the Creole theory rather than the Pidgin Creole theory. So you're right in that imagination. That's exactly what I was trying to say as well.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Mani,
think-
you have a question? Go ahead. Unmute yourself first.
Okay, all right. A very fascinating theory, and thanks, Swami, for an amazing introduction. I was thinking, she can easily apply the same theory to emergence of Malayalam, which emerged from Tamil and with a mixture of perhaps some variety of Prakrit as well as Sanskrit. And if you apply the same theory to Malayalam, I wonder if she will find similar results. And if it does, I think it will add support to her theory.
100% money. A really good observation. I can see how that's possible. And this is exactly, I mean, you can see that the passion with which she says that statement, which she says that she wants to reimagine the theory. So I think she thinks that that's too simple, the old Creole theory. And this is a more global, it's a theory that can be applied across context, which means it's a globalizable theory. And these are how languages perhaps are formed. Maybe that's the case. She's
Right.
going to make subsequent chapters. So I completely agree. That's a very good extrapolation of the theory in the Malayalam setting. Yes.
I
Thank
think
you.
she talks about it in her other book. This Malayalam thing, she talks about it in her other book.
Bama, can I add one more point on this Malayalam thing?
Yeah, please.
Go ahead.
See, if you really go into Malayalam and then able to really listen to it very carefully, that when the people are speaking on that, you will find that the root words of Tamil is still followed over there. There are a lot of
Yeah.
root words, and then you may find it like those who really love Tamil to learn the real without mixing in English. You want to speak on that, then the right to easily pick up the root words from Malayalam if you listen to them. Because I'm working with a lot of Malayali colleagues when they speak, and then I used to listen to them. Look like we lost the words, or we are not using the Tamil root words, but they are still using it actually. So I could say that the Malayalam is a Creole of Tamil and Sanskrit. This is what my understanding about Malayalam. It is exactly
Don't
I
tell
can
them
say in
that.
this.
Yeah. They might beat you up.
Yeah.
but see, we are here to try to understand it likely. I can
Yeah, we're
give
speculating.
sure, we can give a just list it out, record it, list it out. I want to do such a things actually, but I don't have a chance for that to do that one. Like record it, and each word is separated by one line, and then we can say this is the root word of Tamil, and this comes from Sanskrit. Like that, we can very easily list it out actually.
Let's go to Vahis. He had a comments to make. Vahis?
Yeah, so I have several comments to make here. I do appreciate the way she is approaching the problem area and trying to transform what she has experienced in the Caribbean landscape and the Creolization into other continents and the ancient languages. Yes, there is a lot of fusion, but what we have to be careful about is the language classifications that she's bringing into picture and the timeline of language evolution that she's trying to cover is pretty vast. So we have to be cautious here about the Indo-European languages versus the Dravidian languages. So Indo-European languages have evolved, and the timeline is very crucial. And I think I asked this question in the forum as well. The 10th and 12th century CE timeline. She didn't say BCE or CE, and Muthurasanaya, you said it is probably BCE. I still have a question on that because when we talk about Indo-European and descendants of Indo-European languages and Indo-Aryan languages, yes, we are talking about 12th century, 15th century BCE. But when we talk about Hindi, which is what she is indicating here, which are adopting the Dravidian grammatical structures, that is 10th century CE. So that's why we have to be careful. The Indo-Aryan languages and the Prakrits have the same structure, have the same vocabulary. Where it actually starts changing is when they call the new Indo-Aryan languages, which are the Upper Brahmsas, that are Hindi, Bengali, and all those things. Those are the ones that there is a theory, according to her and other scholars, that they could have picked up the Dravidian grammatical structures, which is the post-Persian stuff. So the Prakrit languages, the Pali and the Ardhamagadi and all those ones are direct descendants in the Indo-European, Indo-Aryan lineage, and they don't have this difference. They are still the same. It's just the simplification part. So we need to be careful about the time boundary that she is talking about. And the earlier ones are not really Creoles. The Creoles really could have happened in the later stages. And I think the 10th century and 12th century could be the CE, because that's when the real fusion happens. And that also, it's only a theory. It's not the theory, because what she's mentioning here is about the grammatical structure, the postposition adaptation by the new Indo-Aryan languages like Hindi. And I do agree, like I can double click on that and then go into Tamil a bit. I did look into that yesterday as well in Tamil for all the Tamil fans. Geeta, pardon me for going into the Tamil a little bit. In Tamil, we call this sol a word, and a word ending as pahudi, bihudi. Word ending is the bihudi, and we have and the nouns, the pair chol, we matram, we call it the urubu, and we have that called Vettumai Urubugal, Ayalku Innadu Kanne. That is exactly what she is talking about, where it is being separated out. And this has happened in English as well. But if you really look at it, in the original Indo-Aryan, Indo-European lineage, in Latin and all the other languages, it is still the same. But how did English pick that up? English never had interaction with Dravidian. And also in the same Indo-Aryan lineage, Persian seems to have dropped the case endings as well. So it's again in the same Indo-Aryan lineage without any interaction with Dravidian languages, but it has also dropped the case endings and adopted the postpositions like the Dravidian languages. So, I mean, her proposition is a viable, something that we need to explore. Maybe she will explain that in the later chapters. But for now, I'm a little iffy, and it's a bit cloudy. It's okay, I guess, for the first chapter of the book to be like that. But later on, hopefully we will see. And also, we need to be cognizant of what sort of languages that are in context. So at the time of Aryan arrival, the current theory holds that there have been 4 possible languages that existed, or language families that existed in India. And that is Dravidian, Austroasiatic like Munda languages, and Tibeto-Burmese languages like Nihali. And also they have this language X theory, which is the Vedic Indus Valley Civilization languages, which nobody is able to decipher yet. So these were the languages that she should be bringing in as the Prakrit creation languages, nothing else. So if Aryans brought in Sanskrit, one of these 4 languages could have merged and brought in the Prakrit, which is not the case. Nobody has done that. I don't know if she does that later on in the book, but if at all the Prakrit creation is a Creolization, then these are the languages that needs to be brought into the picture, not Hindi or anything. Hindi and Bengali and all of those are further down the tree in the Indo-Aryan lineage into Prakrits, and further down simplification, and then they might have merged with the Dravidians and then picked up the postpositions and the grammatical structures. So those are the comments that I just wanted to make. I'm just being a bit critical at this point, but we'll see.
Okay, let me just add one more complication and then we'll open it up. We are pretty close to our time. There are many open questions, obviously. There is no doubt about it. You make very important observation. The timeline of 1000 BC or 1000 CE is, of course, a little bit open. We have, for example, isolated communities. We have about 70, 75 tribes and communities that have been isolated. One that I'm very familiar with is Todas, because I went to school in Ooty. And they did not mix. This is the non-elite people who lived in this part of the world. An anecdotal observation, when you hear Toda speak, they use a lot of ish sound. Kish, mish, அப்படின்னு இருக்கும். But Elamite language has the same type of phonemes. ஆனா தமிழ்ல அது கிடையாது. Tamil does not have those kind of aspirated sound, although Toda is considered a Dravidian language. That's one comment. The other comment is complication is we have Y haplogroup R2 are known to have, it is the belief that they came into India long time ago, long before the Vedic people came, who were R1A. They were sister siblings of the haplogroup R. The reason is in the Iran outer periphery, one of the genomic analysis that was done, one of them was R2, and we have a large number of R2 in Bihar, and we have R2 at 4-5% pretty much all over India. And you find them in the tribes as well as the common people. Many people of Tamil-speaking people have as much as about 5, 6, 7%. So R2 people came into India long before the Vedic people came in. We do not know the exact route they take. If I were to backtrack their current situation, the fact that they are high in Bihar may suggest they came into Bihar via Tibet. This was, by the way, Spencer Wells' theory. And then they distributed into India. We do not know that for a fact. The language they would have carried would have been related to some Proto-Indo-European language. Was that some version of Prakrit? I have no idea. But something for us to keep in mind. Peggy Mohan completely ignores this. The reason is she does not have access to this piece of information that really evolved about 4 or 5 years ago. So that is something for us to keep in mind. We are a little bit past our time. Should we bring our session to a closure?
Yep.
I think Swami has a point to make, Swami.
Okay.
Just a quick observation to Wahis especially. First of all, it's good to be skeptical, Wahis. I agree with that viewpoint. Just two clarifications I want to make. She does not say that Prakrit formation is Creolization. So she only talks about Creolization in the mixture languages. So Prakrit is a separate thing. So she counts that out. And she does not say that when the Indo-Aryan languages or the Creoles form, they actually adopt from Dravidian. She does not say that. She says that structurally they are similar to Dravidian, which means that the Dravidian structure could itself been borrowed or inherited from a really old language. So you're absolutely right with the time. We should be cautious about the time period, but she does not make that case explicitly that the Indo-Aryan languages took the grammar from Dravidian. She does not say that. She says it's similar. Therefore, she leaves plenty of room for the timeline to go as far as back as you rightly pointed out.
Since I wanted to make this point earlier, I'm sorry to have taken another minute. Gare in Sanskrit was garme, vi till Tamil. So the post position gets integrated. It is known as an agglutinative process. That is typically a Dravidian language property. And it is not in, for example, the northern Indo-European languages. Part of it is present in Sanskrit, but Indo-European languages, if you go to German or English, it's still preposition, to house or in-house, but in Tamil it is house in, right? So that difference is very uniquely, and also the in gets integrated with to the noun, and that same thing happens with verbs as well as adjectives. That property is sort of unique to Dravidian language group. By the way, that is also present in Elamite language, and it's also present in Sumerian language. I'm making another point away from the main point. But you made a very nice presentation. It was very nice. You opened up a lot of questions. Let's exchange ideas through the WhatsApp group. Make your comment, and then we'll go through this. And perhaps I'm thinking before we meet with Peggy Mohan, we should meet ourselves and have this ironed out in our own head. I think it'll be good for us to discuss, because obviously it has raised a lot of creative process in all of us, which is really what the purpose of these kinds of meetings are. Okay, let's bring a closure, and Bama will say the usual.
Okay. Sridevi, you have been raising the hand. Is it a quick comment?
Yeah.
Please.
One, I just want to ask, why is that case endings are discussed so deep when you analyze a language? What is so much unique, or why she talks about these case endings? You can even answer in WhatsApp, just a question.
Yeah, let's do WhatsApp. That's
Yeah,
an
yeah,
important
I
topic,
have
though.
even more
Yeah, thank you.
You put a finger on a very important property of Dravidian languages.
அனைவருக்கும் வணக்கம், மிக்க நன்றி மாமா, நன்றி. பேசியவர்களுக்கும் வினாக்கள் எழுப்பியவர்களுக்கும் நன்றி. என்னுடைய தலைவர் முத்தரசன் அவருக்கு மிக்க நன்றி.
அவர் உங்களை தலைவிங்கிறாருங்கம்மா.
இல்ல இல்ல, தலைவின்னு சொல்றது இவங்க நிறைய போய் சொல்லுவாங்க.
பார்க்கலாம்.
Let's bring it to a closure. Yeah. So we should really congratulate ourselves for having this session, which is an eye-opening session on the linguistic forum. So as we have been talking in this study circle, like we want to understand this, what brings in a civilization, and language is a very important part of the civilization. So we should also have some reading materials in this forum, because both Muttarasan Ayya as well as Arasa Ayya keep telling, as well as Manivannan Ayya, they keep telling that it is, when we want to understand a civilization, it is very important to see it in a multidisciplinary process, and linguistic is one of them. And so we had taken this effort, and all the 8 reviewers, they have readily come forward to do this. And today we had Swami presenting the chapter 1. It was a very amazing presentation. There were lots of anecdotes, as well as the examples. Like, you made the flow chart, which made it more intuitively pleasing, and it's very, for any first timers, it is very easy to grasp the material. And also you are like the thing, like you are giving a live example, like going in a Vande Bharat train and seeing what is happening. So those are very
Thank you, Swami,
interesting
for swapping the
observations.
content with me. Ideally, I should have done this, but thank you for swapping this. I
was
wouldn't have
about
been
to
able to
say.
do this much of a good job.
Thank
Yeah.
you. Thank you.
Actually, that is another thing. Like, Vagis was supposed to do this presentation, but for some reasons he was in vacation. So Swami is also in vacation, but he has readily accepted the opportunity and grabbed the opportunity and made a very good start. Let's hope this session continues very well in the upcoming sessions. I am sure, because this has thrown so many questions into us. So the questions will keep evolving as we go forward. And also, like, thanks to RMRL for doing the live streaming, to Dr. like especially Dr. Sundar Ganesan, Mr. Subbu and Mr. Ranjit, who has been helpful in doing this live streaming. And also thank you all participants for being very nice and staying out throughout the time with the high energy and very curious mind. Thank you all. Yeah. We'll meet in the next session. The next session will be done by Mr. Alagari Swami. He'll be doing on the Dakkaning language, which is chapter 2. And that will happen next Saturday, 9 p.m. Yeah. And as Muttarasan Ayya mentioned, if you have any questions, please be participative in the WhatsApp group what we have. If any of the newcomers like Geeta ma'am, Dr. Harish, if you want to join, let me know. I can add you to the groups. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you all. Bye.
Thank you. Goodbye. Have a great weekend.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Ma.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ma.
ஒரு நிமிடம் பேசுவோம் நம்ம.
சரிங்க.
இல்லை ட்ராப் பண்ணிட்டாரு. அப்போ
ஒரு ட்ராப் பண்ணிட்டாரு.
நம்ம இப்போ ஜாயின் பண்ண சொல்லுவோமா?
சரி. கால் பண்ணட்டுமா?
கால் பண்ணுங்க.
அழகிரி சுவாமி ஐயா, நீங்க ட்ராப் பண்ணிக்கோங்க.
ரெக்கார்டிங் ஸ்டாப் பண்ணிட்டேன்.
மறுபடியும் வந்துட்டாரு.
நீங்க
ரெக்கார்டிங் ஸ்டாப் பண்ணிட்டீங்க இல்லைங்களா? யூடியூபையும் ஸ்டாப் பண்ணிடுறேன் ஒரு நிமிஷம்.